So for me, it's easy to sympathize with Ukraine's position, having lived there and having loved, living there, um, having built a life there. Like the peak of much of my existence, happened in Ukraine. Uh,
Well,
yeah, oh, absolutely. Like my career wise, the peak, I got married there. I had a child there. Um, it's not
still
hard.
in Ukraine right now.
No, I'm not in Ukraine right now. No, no,
Okay,
no.
okay.
I mean, the grandparents. So, like
Mhm.
my son's grandparents,
Okay.
uh, one grandparent is currently there. Yes, relatives are in Odessa, and actually one is in Bakhmut, the grandfather. Very, yeah,
War zone right now.
right,
Yes,
right.
that's very
So,
dangerous place to be as a civilian right now.
right. So it's easy for me to empathize with Ukraine,
Mhm.
but it's not, some other people. And the world reaction 3 months ago to Ukraine's,
Mhm.
plight is a soft word for it, but was so much more than I expected. And in many ways, so pleasing. But I did hear recently someone complaining about $40 billion that the American Congress is, sending to Ukraine in some form or other. And
Mhm.
I guess to a person who is upset about that, an American taxpayer who imagines that, you know, he works hard, in some ways he feels that he's suffering, not really, but there may be ways that he feels that his, life is rougher than he would like it to be.
Right. Yeah.
And he knows that there's money coming out of his paycheck and it's already going to things that he doesn't like, millions of things inside of America. And now, on top of all those other things, we're sending $40 billion to Ukraine. I'm wondering what you say to that person.
Well, first of all, we are very grateful for all of the support that Ukraine is receiving. All Ukrainians are, and I think what I would argue as a case for helping Ukraine, because Ukraine can't produce military equipment. Most of those factories were bombed. So without weapons coming from somewhere, Ukraine will fold, right? Um, Ukraine can't export what it usually exports, metal, agricultural exports, food, because Russia has blockaded Odessa and the Black Sea ports. So they're destroying Ukraine economically and causing inflation actually all over the world. So we also need help because of that, because otherwise will have economic collapse, refugees coming to all over the world, and and a big genocide basically in Europe again. If that's not enough, if preventing this is not enough, I think another justification for helping Ukraine would be that Ukrainian army is fighting so that you know NATO countries, including Americans, don't have to fight on European soil. Because if you listen to Putin carefully and if you look at his actions, um, if Ukraine folds, which it will without external help, um, after the genocide, the cleansing, after Putin does whatever he wants with Ukraine, he will be forcing basically all of the male population, conscripting them like he's doing this in the occupied Donbass region, throwing at the front lines of the next war, and that next war may be with a NATO state, with Poland. Why is Poland buying? Has recently ordered 500 HIMARS missile launch, um, you know, vehicles. It's not because it thinks that it's safe. For most countries, you know, 5 or 50 would be probably enough, right? But Russia fights with artillery, and I think, being far away, it's easy to dismiss what's happening in Europe, but understanding Putin's logic um, will, I think, forces us to realize that the next war will be on NATO territory, and it might be conventional, just like it is in Ukraine, without nuclear weapons being involved, but it would cause, massive deaths, also including American soldiers.
Okay. Right.
And
And of course,
that is the reason to support Ukraine now, is so that American lives and are saved in the potential future war.
and
Some people might think the risk of that is small, but if you ask someone from Poland, from the Baltic states who are in NATO, they think they're next. They're very clear about that being a very real risk for them. And yeah, there might be some narrative that's, oh, but we can always cancel our NATO status in the United States, and it's, exit from all of these agreements. But in the world that will create, the war will come to U.S. soil.
okay, yeah. So you did sketch out a potential future where America becomes involved and American lives are lost once a NATO country is attacked. I wanted to say, I hate to have a hierarchy of which lives are more valuable, but probably to some extent, countries, probably all of them or most of them, inside of their own border.
Value their citizens, right?
Yeah, exactly. I guess what I wanted to point out, because what I did do some thinking about the number 40 billion. And so I looked up the budget, the military budget, US military budget is like 800 billion for a year. That's in 2020. And so as a percentage of that, 40 billion out of 800 billion is about 5%. That's big. But I guess then I started to imagine it cynically, a bit cynically, maybe very cynically, which is to imagine what the American interest is. So if I imagine that 40 billion going to Ukraine as part of the American military budget, and we're not even having to throw our guys over there. So all the fighting is going to be done for us.
And I will tell you more. One of the bigger chunks of Russian exports was their armaments. This is the best marketing for American weapons. After this war, and after Ukraine shows how effectively, these last generation weapons fight in the war against, what they call the second biggest army in the world, which is complete garbage, when faced with modern weapons. India will stop buying Russian weapons and will start buying American weapons now. And all of the countries that are buying or that used to buy Russian weapons will immediately stop. So, I would say consider this the cost of sales.
A business investment. I hate to yeah.
This is an investment. If you look at it cynically from a business point of view, this is the best marketing you could probably think about as an arms manufacturer and exporter.
Right. Okay. And then another question I had in my mind, I don't know what the answer is. Maybe you have some knowledge or inkling of what you think the answer would be, but I'm thinking that part of that 40 billion, it doesn't just get handed to Ukraine. It probably goes to American arms manufacturers and we buy from them. So actually the money goes straight into the American economy.
Exactly. Yep. That's an important point, a very important one for Americans to realize, and realizing that, our government is not um, the most trustworthy with with money. This is not, pallets of dollars coming into Ukraine. We don't need that. Ukraine needs weapons. These will be these are in kind. These payments are going to American manufacturers of um, of armaments. So they're actually not leaving America. It's the goods that are, right. But the money is actually staying in the American economy. I mean, this is the biggest war since World War II, but it's not that big. The land lease that United States provided to Europe during World War II, I think the whole of it was something like $60 billion, but those were, those the 1940s dollars. That was the equivalent of, I think, something like 50,000 tons of gold. So it's like, that would have been trillions now. So um, in the magnitude is much different now, right? It's not the same amount, and like if you use the same logic that, why should we help anyone, why then you can take it to very dangerous grounds. Why should we pay for vaccines, to supply the rest of the world, even though it's only Germany and United States, I think, that have developed effective vaccines. um, it's We are in a globalized world. I think this is a very difficult realization for many. But being selfish and being um, isolationist, isolationist, I don't think it's an option in this world. Isolate. When the world is too complex to self-isolate and not, have negative consequences.
Right.
Russia is seeing this now. Well, this summer, their economy will experience what it's like, when you have to develop every single widget. It's Isolationism is, I think that it's probably a topic for someone's PhD, how this is not a viable or a desirable strategy these days, and it's just impossible in the modern world.
I guess it's hard to see, though. It's hard to see the connections sometimes between
Right.
how those things far away matter to me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because, yeah,
Yeah, and exactly what is happening now, for example, with food prices. How does, your supermarket bill, how does Ukraine relate to that, right? But Ukraine provides food for, I think, like 500 million people. So when that food is stuck in Ukraine, there is less on the global market, and the prices go up. That's just how economics works, right? So there's not enough grain in Italy to make pasta, not enough sunflower oil for the British to make fish and chips. They buy it from somewhere else. Prices there rise. And then there is hunger in Africa and poorer Asian countries because they can't afford double, triple increases in the costs of their staples. So,
yeah.
you know, I think there will be more food inflation because of Ukraine being unable to export through 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 the Black Sea ports all the food that Ukraine is growing, and that's very easy to dismiss. What's the use for Ukraine, and I think the world is seeing that. And the important thing to realize is that it's not because Ukraine is bad and doesn't want to share the food. It's because Russia invaded and is not allowing Ukraine to export this food, and that's why it's creating this food crisis in poorer countries and inflation in the rest of the world.
They've got a blockade in the Black Sea. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep. Hmm. There are, yeah, the Russian Black Sea Fleet is there, shooting missiles at Odessa and the southern cities, and is not allowing ships in pour out of Ukrainian ports, and has actually, I think, shot at a couple of ships that were trying to leave in the first days of the war to demonstrate their intentions. And this is illegal by, the free shipping, I think, is foundational for global trade and all of these global rules that we have, and Russia is flaunting them, and it's not Russia that's being blamed for inflation, for your bigger bill at the supermarket, but it is the perpetrator. It is the real reason why